right, thank you. So I am actually starting my podcast also channel. That's also going out live. It's also on iHearts and iTunes Radio. So please, everyone, welcome to Bridges Live with Dr. Paul. We're having a black coffee conversation. Strong talk about real issues with real people. So we have this wonderful panel, and I know everyone is going to enjoy this panel. This is not the first or the last of the. This is not the last of the conversation, but it's definitely the first I'm having with this wonderful panel. We're about ready to go on live with social media. It's about ready to turn over. There's a little bit of delay, so if people are watching it or texting you with questions and stuff with friends and family, just have them just give it a little bit of time. So with this all going on, I think we are live. I have to wait till I see this big red light come on and... All right, welcome to Black Coffee Conversation. I'm Dr. Paul. We're having a panel of discussion of PTSD trauma in the Black community. We are actively live right now, so I just want people to know that they can put in comments to my YouTube channel, to the Facebook channel. I probably won't get to some of your questions or anything like that, but please, who's ever on the panel, if you have a specific question for them, they're going to give their name and who they are, maybe you can contact them so you can talk to them personally, and then we'll just go from there. So please, I'm going to talk to my upper left, and I think that is, holy buckets, I can see. Dr. Jasmine, you're on my upper left. So please introduce yourself to the community and what you do.
Okay, how are you all today? My name is Dr. Jasmine Ward. I'm in Arlington, Texas. I'm a public health professional and entrepreneur. I am the founder and executive director of Black Ladies in Public Health. We are a group of students and professionals, researchers. We have people who are adjacent in public health. We say adjacent in terms of the work that they do. We see health in everything, and so anyone that can see health in us, we are willing to support and bring you along for the ride. We're trying to really advance health equity for not just Black folks, but all folks who are marginalized, and realize that we have work to do in this space, and we're the best to do it. So we are leveraging our own experiences and education to do so.
And Dee, you're actually off to my right, so please, Dee, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dorcas Austin. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. However, I live in Columbia, Maryland, and I am so happy to be here. I am a psychotherapist. I've been doing this for about 5 years. I've been doing it full-time for almost 2 years. My specialty is in spirituality. I help people integrate their spiritual lives and their personal lives. So I'm very happy to be here.
And Dr. Vance, you are next to her, so please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Dr. Thomas Vance, and I am also a psychotherapist providing coastal responsive therapy at Concierge Psychology in Atlanta, Georgia. And I am a teaching faculty member at the New School for Social Research here in New York City. It's such a pleasure to be here and with everyone else.
And and Alexander, you're next.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. And I'm from the West Coast. I'm here in California. I reside in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a psychotherapist, and an organizational relationship coach. I'm currently the deputy director of the adult and older adult behavioral health system here in San Francisco. I oversee an array of services that include mental health and substance use services. And and one of my passions are working with people that suffer from severe mental illness. And I've been working across the age spectrum for the past 30 years, trying to make a difference in the lives of those in need. So today's conversation is really something that, with the couple of pandemics that we have, one racism, the other called COVID-19, that we're kind of battling on two fronts. And so I'm seeing a lot of suffering, a lot of health disparities, and I'm happy to join the conversation this morning. So,
and thank you. And Kelly, please, you're next.
Peace and blessings, everybody. Kelly Little, Charlotte, North Carolina, by way of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am an emotional wellness coach, fatherhood coach. I own and operate a executive leadership and life coaching practice. I'm in the community in Charlotte at the intersection of theory and practice, helping people to discover and understand who they are, while also helping people to realize that in this space of helping others, we also make ourselves vulnerable to trauma. And so understanding how we give from our essence and not from give from our excess and not our essence, so that we can help people be whole and actually function at optimal performance like they want to perform.
Thank you. And Dr. Kelsey, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kelsey Ball. I'm originally from Bermuda. I'm currently living and working in Washington, D.C. As a clinical psychologist. I'm also a yoga instructor. My clinical specialty was psychological assessment, so assessing and diagnosing mental health conditions. And I'm currently the director of behavioral health at 5 Medicine, which is a telehealth company. And we provide medical, mental health, and other holistic services all virtually. So you can access treatment and services from the comfort of your own home through smartphone, computer. And you can always visit us at 5medicine.com. We really believe that, wellness is not just physical, it's also mental as well. And we try to treat the whole person. I think that's what's really needed at this time. So that's kind of what our providers focus on.
Thank you. And Dr. Powell, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Wisdom Powell, and I serve currently as the director of the Health Disparities Institute at the University of Connecticut, where I also have a tenured appointment in the Department of Psychiatry as an associate professor. If I had to summarize my work, I would say over the course of the past 20 plus years, I've been working both as a scholar and an activist to bridge the divide between communities of color and health systems, but specifically focusing on the ways that racial trauma manifests in the lives of Black men and boys. In my prior role in the Obama administration, I served as special advisor on military mental health to Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. And so I bring those schools of training together and experience together to serve the Black and brown communities in our country.
Thank you. And Dr. Jasmine, please.
Oh, I've gone already. Thank you.
Oh, where am I? Dr. Hammond.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Nikisha Hammond. I am a psychologist. I live in Tampa Bay, close to the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and I've owned a private practice for the past 11 years. I'm also the past president of the Florida Psychological Association, and I do a lot of work with the media and speaking, trying really to reduce the stigma of mental health, particularly in Black and brown communities. So every Tuesday for the past couple of years here, I've been on Black Women Empowered Incorporated Facebook page. We do a Facebook Live on Tuesday evenings. There's almost 2 million followers at this point. So it's been an honor that the owner of that page has found mental health to be very important to the conversation. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here as well, because obviously these are very critical conversations right now that's needed.
And Sanika, I hope I pronounced that right. You're next. You have to unmute yourself. Tanika? Let me see. Can you hear me? You're next. All right, we're going to get going. I'm not sure if she can hear me. So what we want to talk about is trauma. What do you guys think? We know we are in a trauma state.
Well, excuse me.
Oh.
You didn't call upon me.
Yes. What?
I'm right next to you on my screen. Linda Marsanico?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Miss Linda.
It's Dr. Linda Marsanico. I'm a clinical psychologist and a spiritual coach. I'm a writer, and I've been writing about love and compassion for about 7 years. I'm aware of my white privilege since the 80s when I was doing research on prejudice and racism. And I see myself as an activist because as a person with privilege, I need to be doing something. Otherwise, I would be a racist.
Thank you, Miss Dr. Linda. How you doing? So we're gonna talk about the trauma. Now we know we're in a trauma state situation, and we know that we have to heal as a community. Dr. Jasmine, how do you see that healing process taking place?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Dr.
Well, I would love to hear from the psychologist first.
No, Dr. Paul, are there people in the waiting room? My friends are texting me saying they're in the waiting room.
Okay. Yeah. Let me see. I apologize. There are people in the waiting room. There you go. I hope they're in now.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So, Dr. Jasmine, please let's respond to that about that trauma issue and how you address that and how we can start that healing process.
Sure. So I want to make sure people understand I'm a health educator and health promoter. So I am really interested in how to, first of all, get people to the point of understanding what we're dealing with. And so while it's status quo, a lot of what we're dealing with, many of us and our mothers and fathers have been dealing with this for a long time. We also understand that nothing happens in isolation, and that a lot of this stuff is intersectional. And so with the thoughts around politics, around social, environmental, cultural, all of these things that we're dealing with together are creating what we're experiencing at this time. And so part of what I've been doing and tasked with is really trying to respond to issues of, what seems to be a singular issue, but really more complex. And so we have to really think about how to get intersecting fields together, individuals who have agency or understand their privilege, and whether it's in education, racial privilege, even financial and economic privilege together to really decide and understand where we can make the most impact, because I do understand that with coronavirus being something that's happening right now, a lot of us have seen where we've kind of deviated and start thinking about other things, but in fact they are one and the same. We are dealing with issues of racial inequities and thinking about that and how they contribute to our health disparities that we're seeing. So I find that one of the things with education is that we undervalue it, but it really is something that is the first step in us even getting to the root of the trauma that we're experiencing, and we should not own it as something of our own, but also something that has happened and has continued to happen and allowed to happen under the veil of advancing, which a lot of us have recognized, I think, at this point, that we are still very much fighting as the days of when we arrived to the shores of the United States, that we are still fighting for freedom. And so that's a real concern that we have kind of lost sight of some of this stuff.
And Dr. D, how do you approach that trauma that we are having? The same question to all of you. So I want you to think about it, because we have to face it, we have to understand it. So how do you approach it, D? You're muted. You're muted.
I thought I was really doing something by muting myself earlier. I have to remember to unmute now. So I really like the question of trauma. My community doesn't really have a concept of trauma. Like most people that you talk to from the Black community, you ask them if they've experienced trauma, and they'll automatically say no. And I guess what I have to do is I kind of have to reinterpret it for them, and just try to help them understand that trauma is true pain. It's extreme pain, and I don't know a group of people in this United States who've experienced more pain than Black people here in this country. And so I really like to talk about trauma as in talking about pain. And for most people, this pain has just been going on for so long of a time, but people have been silent about it, and they have had to be silent about it. What I'm so encouraged about during this time in particular is that for the first time, I feel like I can actually talk about some of these issues that have been just so important to me and I've been passionate about. But before this time, I would say about 7 to 10 years ago, I would say nothing about it. I wouldn't post about it on social media because I always had these jobs. And I felt like if I posted or if I said something about it, I could get fired. I remember a few years ago in Chicago, we shut down something that happened. They were doing some protesting. We shut down Michigan Avenue on Thanksgiving, and we were out there marching the streets. Here I am with my sister. We're like marching the streets. What am I thinking about in my mind? Oh, I hope that the TV cameras are not here because I wouldn't want the people in my office to see what I'm doing. Like instead of just being all there 100%, I'm still trying to in some way hide. And that's what I'm really excited about, that I've come to a place where I can just freely speak about this pain that our community has had to endure. And I know that I'm not by myself having that experience and working for a white corporate America and all these different places where people just feel like they have to hold that pain. They have to hold all of that stuff that's so important to them, to themselves. And I think that silence is what's really killing us. I think that is the trauma. The trauma is, yes, we've all gone through these experiences that are hurtful. But then again, we can't even process it. We can't talk about it because we're just too afraid.
Thank you. And Dr. Vance, you're next, please.
Yes, I think it's a great topic to talk about trauma, and like Dr. Austin, it's really complex. And I think we have to be really more specific with our language when we talk about just trauma. So the lens that I will be talking more about is racial trauma. So when we talk about racial trauma, this is a form of just racial-based stress. It refers to Black or people of color or Indigenous individuals. Their reactions to dangerous events, real or perceived experiences of racial discrimination. And these racial or traumatic experiences may include, threat of harm and injuries. This may include just humiliating events, witnessing racial discrimination. And this can be related to issues such as post-traumatic stress. But still, this race-based stress, this racial trauma is really unique. And the reason why it's so unique is because it involves ongoing individual and collective injuries due to exposure or re-exposures of race-based stress. So this is continuing. That's what makes it a little bit more complex. And it both has physical and mental impact. It impacts our psyche by being hypervigilant, threats to nightmares, symptoms of anxiety, irritability, sleep disturbance, kind of similar to post-traumatic stress like disorder. But this is all rooted in the race-based stress specifically. So when we talk about healing, how does one heal or reduce symptoms? Again, it's complex. Why? It's because we are challenging our racial wounds that occur over a collective of years. And this is including historical trauma from different generations that get passed down from generation to generation. And this could be treated through individual therapies, group therapy, and also community engagement like this, by talking about these different types of issues. And also coping strategies that we can all do in our own personal life, and such as, talking to others. How do you experience this? How are you feeling with this type of challenges? Something that I really like to use, especially with younger people, is actually racial socialization, or the messages received by individuals about their racial group or membership from their friends, their families, and their loved ones. This creates a more positive regard of one's individual racial identity. Another one is just acknowledgement. Let's actually just call this out, as Dr. Austin was talking about that pain. So acknowledging that pain, talking about that pain, is one of the powerful tools is to have awareness and insight about what you're actually experiencing. And another area is setting boundaries. How does one create boundaries and engaging in triggering conversations to gain control of your own mental state? So this can include, putting boundaries of discussion where racial discrimination or harm is happening to us. And then lastly, I would like to throw out is just having cultural responsive therapy. That's a little bit different than just overall therapy. it's best for people to find a therapist or clinician who is closely responding to their culture, their identity, their race, their religion, their spirituality, so many different parts of us. It's really important for a clinician to respond to. So this is one way of this addressing racial trauma and our psychological well-being.
Thank you. And Mr. Alexander, how are we going to face this trauma as a community or as a single person? How do you attack it yourself?
Well, first of all, it's individuals like Dr. Vance that give me hope. And when I think about all the challenges we face, especially in California, in the Bay Area, that in San Francisco, African Americans comprise about 5% of the population, but make up close to 40% of those seeking services in mental health. And so one of the challenges I have in terms of my clinicians is that most of them do not reflect the population that they serve. And so it's really difficult and a challenge to have someone to have the compassion, to be able to have the empathy and put themselves in someone else's shoes. It can be done, but you attack it with training, but also with recruiting, folks from the community. One of the things I see is, that gentrification is set in, especially in the cities of Oakland and San Francisco. And we see, when you look at what does a typical homeless person look like in San Francisco, it's actually a Black person. The other thing that we look at is the health disparities. So Black people are dying at a much higher rate than any other of the population. And right now, when we got coronavirus on the front and also racism, that we're just peeling back the tip of the iceberg right now. And so really it's being able to understand what trauma Black folks are going through. And one thing I think about is that each day there's microaggressions that happen toward many of our clients that we don't even think about. There's microaggressions that happen to me as an individual that we don't think about. And right now we're all thinking about it. And I'm hoping that that opens up the conversation so we can actually talk about it and make some changes. So right now I'm very excited that, we're kind of peeling off the Band-Aid of some of these wounds. And we have to look at the whole historical, social, political context that we're in now. And, I think change can happen on the individual level, but on a collective level. So I have hope.
Thank you. And Mr. Kelly, same question to you. How are you focusing on what you do with your nonprofit, your organization, of facing this trauma of what our Black community are in?
So what I'll say is this. First of all, some excellent points by each one of the panelists already. But I would add, for me, first of all, as an individual who experienced trauma on so many levels, 25 years in the military, numerous deployments, senior non-commissioned officer, there was a stigma or stereotype that he could not avail that information to those who we lead and be considered the leaders. So there was a time where I said, you know what? No longer will I not speak out about this atrocity, because prior to getting in, you go through this rigorous process of whether or not you're capable of being a soldier. But on the exit, you don't debrief or have conversation around how am I feeling now? How does that impact and affect my family, my friends? Again, that modeling component is the piece that everybody sees. And so I'm a firm believer that with a nonprofit, and I'm also a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher, so I implement that in everything that I do in my interactions with young people, so that if we can talk about the trauma, if we can talk about the racism, and then process through healthy ways of releasing that, then what we do is we build a replicatable model that has been used in some of the schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. And I lead them in the beginning, and I teach young people how to lead them on the back end. And the same work that I'm doing with men, and let's be honest, there's this conversation that men don't cry, they're providers, they're protectors. However, we're nurturers too. And so being able to change that stereotype and that stigma and align it in a way that I'm operating in accordance with what I feel inside and regulating that behavior, I now create a standard for others to see that I'm in alignment with my beliefs, my values. And so what that does is it changes the conversation. So just prior to getting on here, I had a group of men who are doing meditation, and they're letting go of a lot of pain that they have been holding on to for many years. And they clearly said to me, they never would have done this, prior to being a part of this process. So that's the way I try to show up. A lot of times we look for the gusto as opposed to dealing with things on the level that we're on right now and modeling that behavior and expectations.
Thank you. And Miss Kelsey, Dr. Kelsey, please.
Yes. Thank you again for having this discussion. Everybody's hit on some really great points. And the idea, I think, of trauma and racial trauma specifically for me is very interesting because as I said, I grew up in Bermuda, which is a predominantly Black country, Black island. So I'm in the majority. So for the first 18 years of my life, racism, racial trauma wasn't something I even remotely considered. It wasn't something I faced on a daily basis. Of course, there's still racism in Bermuda. There is still microaggressions in Bermuda, but it's very subtle, and it's not something you are confronted with on a daily basis. So then in moving to the United States for college and grad school, literally almost the first few months in this country, my eyes got opened. It was kind of like a reality check, and I started learning more about the history of this country, and I felt myself as I was experiencing these microaggressions, as Mr. Jackson mentioned, and just getting confronted with all these subtle hits on a daily basis. I noticed in myself a shift, just in becoming distrustful and more suspicious. And that's actually was the focus of my dissertation in grad school, cultural mistrust. And all the ways it manifests for people of color, and its role in being a barrier to seeking treatment and things like that. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is destigmatizing mental health. So when you're dealing with racial trauma and trauma in any sense, reaching out for help, making it not taboo to talk to a mental health provider, to seek treatment and wellness in many different ways. So destigmatization of mental health is big for me. Also recognizing the ways that trauma shows up in our bodies. And that's another reason I pursued my yoga teacher training. So I've been having a lot of conversations with people in the DC area, owners of fitness studios and instructors, people who specialize in movement. How we can get Black people and people of color in these studios, because there's so many resources, and trauma manifests in our body in different ways. So you could have headaches, you could have sleep disturbance, you might have muscle tension. So there's just so many ways that trauma shows up for people of color in our bodies, and it contributes to these health disparities. So a lot of what I focus on, especially right now, is kind of encouraging people of color to move their bodies in whatever way feels good for them. If that's playing sports, going and playing basketball. I know for a lot of young men of color is big for them. Going to the yoga studio, doing bar, whatever feels good for you is really important. It's so crucial to move our bodies, and realizing that movement is one of the greatest healers for us. And for healing trauma. So the way we can move our bodies is really big, and there's a lot of Black-owned studios in this area. I just want to put that out there. People of color are owning studios, so just getting Black people and people of color out into these studios, and so we can move our bodies is really big. It's something I'm focusing on right now.
Thank you. Dr. Wisdom Powell, you have done so much research and education on trauma in the Black community. There's a lot of disparity of misunderstanding about the information. And again, speak to that trauma that our community is having, please.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity, and I've really enjoyed the conversation that's taking place so far, and I won't repeat points that were really poignant and already made by this esteemed group of leaders. But what I will say is that when I think about trauma, I often have to go back to, text and information that have inspired me and reframing and conceptualizing. And so I like to use Edwidge Danticott's breath, eyes, memory as a place for us to start when we think about healing from trauma. First, we have to breathe, literally. I wasn't surprised by the fact that we are now having conversations about breathing in our community, given that Eric Garner couldn't catch his breath, George Floyd couldn't catch his breath, and now as a community, we're collectively trying to catch our breath. And we have to remember. So I do a lot of work across the globe, and one of the spaces I work in is in Kigali, Rwanda, and I'm reminded that in that community, after the genocide against the Tutsi, the push wasn't to forget. The push was to remember, because trauma marks the body and the spirit. It reminds you that an injury has taken place here. And without that bodily recognition and reminder, we might not even be aware, as people have pointed out, that we are being traumatized. So it's important that we don't push folks to forget, but we encourage them to remember what's happened, to mark the place of the wound, and to also remember that we can collectively move forward if we address this at a systematic and structural level. So I've been very clear in all of my advocacy and scholarship that we're not going to get over racial trauma by encouraging Black folk to develop more sophisticated coping repertoires alone. We're not going to cope our way out of structural racism and systemic racism. We need re-traumatizing systems, policies, practices, and procedures to be undone, to be disrupted. We need to decolonize psychotherapy and trauma healing so that we recognize that trauma doesn't even have to happen to you directly. We can experience symptoms because we bear witness to the traumas that are inflicted upon our people. And we have to remember that this social media environment that we're in, while helpful in joining and uniting, also presents this unique opportunity for us to watch people being slain on repeat. And so that constant revisiting of the imagery of trauma actually can have significant implications. And we have to remember also that the DSM has not yet recognized racial trauma as a wound or injury that can be treated and diagnosed. So we need to disrupt the ways in which we are diagnosing our people, because we don't present with the same trauma symptomatology. I've been working a lot with boys and men, as you are aware, across the country. And one of the things I like to remind folks is that boys and men have a unique way of confronting trauma, as Mr. Little pointed out. Boys and men are taught all kinds of messages about soldiering on and manning up in the face of stress. And my research has shown over the past 20 years that when Black men do that, it actually intensifies the psychopathology or the depressive symptomatology. So we have to teach our folks that it is okay to air out what is happening to them, that anger is a legitimate response to social injustice. We have to make room for that in the treatment space, in the policy space, and in everyday life if we're truly going to heal as a nation.
Thank you. And Dr. Linda, please, next.
I think we are in a perfect storm. I think the Black community has the ear of the country and the world, and it's time for change, and I'm very hopeful for change. In terms of trauma, I think that an important concept is to take care of the mind, body, and spirit as a very good way to deal with the trauma. Of course, a lot has to be done in the society. We need to disrupt it because it doesn't live up to the Constitution. It's time for change, and it's now. Addressing internal preparation for any kind of survival and thriving A person needs actionable goals for strong mental health. Meditation, mantra. Paul, on your video, you mentioned we need activism and change, but we also need to deal with childhood trauma. And that happens in my heart either from counseling, solidly good counseling, or spiritual methods. A combination of both would be the best. Good nutrition, complex foods, not so many starches, vegetables, little meat, little fish, but a lot of good, fresh, unprocessed food has an effect on the body. Exercise, mindfulness, meditation.
Thank you. And Dr. Hammond, please. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry for that. Great discussion for sure thus far. And I just wanted to add with the trauma question that trauma really, really occurs on a spectrum. And I think a lot of times in communities, people think of like, no, I'm not traumatized, or they think the extreme of PTSD, but there's so much in between. And even myself, just earlier this morning, I was heading to the gym. I was in a rush, running out the house, and I forgot my wallet. And as I was driving and I realized I forgot my wallet, a little part of me was starting to panic. And I'm like, wait, what if a police officer stops me? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
What's going to be my interaction with them? And I'm like, this is insane. Why? Because of the trauma, as Dr. Powell mentioned, of like watching all these videos and the images and what it does to you over and over again on social media. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a segment with my my show on the Black Women Empowered Facebook page about racial trauma. And this is mostly people live in the U.S., but there's a lot of people also that live around the globe on this Facebook Live. And what was sad was people's reactions. And I mean, just the sadness, the anxiety. People were afraid to leave their house, not because of coronavirus, but because they're afraid of what they look like, and is a police officer going to stop me, and what does that look like for them, which is really sad, and that is trauma. So I think we need to be careful, as you know, in the healthcare system, if you will, of explaining trauma, but the different ways that it can really manifest. There's people that are afraid to go to work right now. There's people that are afraid to leave their houses. I've talked to little Black boys that are afraid that someone's going to come into their classroom. I mean, we're talking about 11-year-olds that are going to come into their classroom and hurt them because of the way they look. And that's sad, but that's what trauma does. So what I've really advocated for thus far in the last couple of weeks with people, because unfortunately there is the stigma of mental health, particularly in Black and brown communities, until we get to that point where stigma and people can get the help that they need, I've really been advocating that people get into safe spaces, whatever that looks like for them. If it's one person, if it's your best friend, your spouse, your brother, sister, whoever, or a group of people, and really try to work on this trauma right now, and really try to heal a lot of the pain and rage, understandable rage that's been happening, especially over the last couple of weeks.
You know, one of the things about trauma I've noticed in the Black community, you guys all hit on it, is that how do the community face the trauma they're trying to deny? I think that's what keeps reoccurring in our community. We get so angry about something that we personally have not addressed within ourselves. Do you think that's a problem? Dr. Jasmine, you're up first, please.
Oh, sure. So I actually have been jotting down some notes, and it's very, very interesting that we have a couple of people who mentioned Black people seeking, being some of the individuals who are seeking help. I know Mr. Alexander Jackson mentioned 40% of the population where he is represent Black people. And I think that one of the things that I've been really grappling with is the idea around narratives, right? And who's going to tell the stories of those who are traumatized. Traumatized folks typically are, like I think Dr. Austin mentioned, if you're dealing with it and you are in the midst of it all the time, you really can't catch up with whatever it is in order to deal with it and to actually tell people the experiences. That storytelling is so important for us because it is a part of our healing process. We know that the arts is a very important piece to our healing. And so when we think about just being able to tell the stories of why, for those of us who are traumatized in this public health space, we knew that coronavirus meant something for Black people that maybe most people didn't realize. Even though it's an infectious disease that does not discriminate, we knew, based on our experiences in this space, based on our awareness of how we have been traumatized in health, we knew that that was a big issue. So we were ready to work right away. You know, our antennas were up and we were ready to fight for this. And that's a part of the understanding, like when people deal with certain types of traumas that they're familiar with, you know, they can really activate and they know how to respond. And that has been found in the literature, that if there is a benefit to having had the experiences and to be able to identify it, is that you're able to respond, right? But then too, you have things like, then you deal with the racial inequities and you are familiar with that. And then you have things like having to go into workplace and try to deal with creating these anti-racist systems or dismantling systems, but then you're the one dealing with it. You're the one tasked with that issue. I'm dealing with the trauma, and then I have to go to work, and I have to undo the trauma that's happening at work for you, who have been also playing a role in perpetuating the trauma. So it's really, I feel like it's circular, and I think that part of it is the identification of what we have been dealing with, but also hearing the stories of others so that we understand, oh, that's what that is. Because Dr. Kamara Jones always says you have to name racism. Part of naming racism for me has been now, instead of saying, well, you know, I think that they just don't like me or blah, blah, blah. Why don't you interrogate that response? What is it that that you're experiencing, and why do you think that you're experiencing it, and call it out? Because really and truly at this point, I think that we're fighting on so many fronts. That's why I'm really interested in that interconnectedness of different disciplines and understanding citizen scientists. You don't have to have a PhD to understand what's going on in your community. And you probably have the most innovative strategies and ideas around how to solve them, because you've been doing it. We've been doing it in the communities, since we've had to figure out this thing of racial inequities when we're coming from somewhere that didn't have racial inequities, right? So thinking about those things in ways that are empowering, but also really positioning us to respond adequately.
I want to thank everyone for joining us in this conversation, because I just know that mental health and emotional health and physical health in the Black community, we tend not to address personally unless we're so far gone that we have fallen apart. Dr. D. Dorsha, tell us about how come it's so difficult for Blacks to come in to get mental help that you have found that we need to address as a community also.
Yes, I'd like to actually take both of those questions, the first one and the second one and the third one, and just say we have not addressed trauma within ourselves. Black people have experienced trauma, yet the trauma that we've experienced somehow has been normalized. We've been desensitized to it. Therefore, we don't address it, because I don't even know if we recognize it. And so the story that comes to mind is I watched 12 Years a Slave. I don't know when 12 Years a Slave came out, but it came out a little while ago. And, I kind of came to my place. I think people are starting to get there. They're starting to understand just watching a slave movie is traumatizing to us. So even when this video just came out not too long ago, I saw some of my Facebook friends saying, hey, beware, you don't have to watch that video because it might traumatize you. Just that awareness is really important. So years ago, I did have the awareness, but I did go ahead and decide I was going to watch 12 Years a Slave. And the scene that stands out the most to me is a scene where the characters, and I'm not going to get their names right, I'm not going to get the actors right, but the scene was right on the plantation where folks were picking cotton. The Black folks, you already know, Black folks are picking cotton every day. And so they were just doing it. Well, one day they hired this white guy to come out there and to pick cotton. So the white guy comes out there, he starts picking cotton, and the first thing that came out of his mouth was ouch.
this hurts.
Yeah.
You never see any of the Black people just having that very human response. Ouch, this hurts. And I just had to think about how that relates to where we are today. Like, so many of us are just going through so much pain and hurt and, stuff happening on the job, stuff happening in our families. And never can we just take a step back and say, this hurts. Because we've just been so desensitized to that pain. And so what I think that we need to do is we need to resensitize ourselves to pain, to fear, as Dr. Hammond was talking about, to all of these negative emotions where we can feel it deeply again. And after we become aware of those emotions, then we can begin to process.
Thank you. And Dr. Vance, one of the things I know we face as men that we don't address is reaching out to another male for help. Is that something you address yourself and when you're dealing with the trauma that Blacks are going through or Black America is going through?
Yes, I think it's important to first recognize why we don't reach out and talk. One is socialization. The minute we're born, we're socialized not to do that. We're socialized, and it's kind of interesting growing up as a Black man in this country. We're so close and vulnerable with each other up until we're actually middle school. We're touchy, we're feely, we like to give hugs, and we're so expressive. And then over time, we learn that that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be saying, I love you to another man. You're not supposed to say, oh, I miss you, or, oh, my feelings are hurt because you won't hang out with me. So part of it is really just socialization between just Black men of these rules that we have created and reinforced with each other over a course of many, many years. And when we talk about, again, trauma, I think sometimes we forget that we label trauma sometimes as resilience. To be able to really recover something really fast. And we get praises for, pushing through those trauma. And it's like, wow, you're so resilient. And resilient is not really a choice. It's this adverse response that happens, and you have no other choice but to recover quickly. And I think that's something else that we really need to focus on is resilience is not just a great thing, but when we talk about socialization with Black men, we're taught that. So things that I really do is really break down and let Black men know that we've really been socialized to do this. This is not new. That socialization key is extremely important. The minute we're born, we're giving a football in the color blue. That's socialization. That's trying to point us in a direction of what we should be doing, whatever that should means. And that takes and it sticks in our psyche for many, many years, and it shows up in how we interact with each other. So recognizing that, practicing how to check on each other is an important skill that we have to develop. In the Black community that I'm a part of, usually if something's going on with another guy, somebody says, oh, I'm really hurting, I'm really sad, our response is, oh man, that's real bad. And it's just like, well, what else? Let's unpack that. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's figure out. But again, our socialization, our language needs to be developed in that area. And it takes practice. I think sometimes we think that, once we recognize or gain this awareness, that we're supposed to just get it overnight. And that doesn't work that way. It takes practice and recognizing that, oh, yeah, I have been socialized in this area. Oh, yeah, I do have some shortcomings that I have to personally work on. If you have the emotional availability to even go in that direction, because we're still dealing with the rest of the world and the traumas that we are personally being involved with.
And Alexander, one of the things I think, do we feel guilty being traumatized? Do you think the Black community has a guilt to this or feel guilty?
Well, I would agree. I think one of the biggest challenges is that, all this talent that has left the Black community, that, when we think about manifest destiny and the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, that a lot of the individuals, including many of us on the panel that have experienced some degree of success, that the communities that we grew up in, we've left. And that what we have are folks that are left that are challenged, that over the years, the structural racism that I look at in terms of, that there's many individuals that had a grandmother or an uncle or someone that owned property in their neighborhood that was a family home that they could return to. And now we don't see that. What we see are, the divide between the haves and have-nots is even greater. And so the people that are left in the community are sicker, have more challenges, and experience homelessness and all sorts of challenges much greater than many of us. So I would say that, that if we can come together as a community, that is the most important thing we can do, and to be able to share our experiences. But yeah, I definitely think there's some guilt, and guilt in the folks that have left. It's time to give back, and that's sometimes easier said than done. But I think some of the ills that we're facing are just the fact that we try to be more like the dominant culture and move away and succeed. But you know what? That kind of goes against what our ancestral roots tell us, right? That we're stronger together. And so I think some of the strategies really have to be, how do we reconnect? How do we use forums and platforms to be able to be together? And certainly the protests that I've seen have been something that I haven't seen in a while. That the community coming together, and now we're kind of reliving some of that trauma and pain and repeated imagery. I mean, even for me tonight, me and my wife have been talking that, it's been a challenge for us. We wake up at night, we experience trauma. I have two boys, 12 and 9, and, I sometimes find myself, just worried about them as I worry about myself, our safety. So, yes.
I remember growing up, and I remember when in Atlanta, those black boys were being taken. It was around 1977. A lot of those, my mother said the same thing. She's like, she didn't want us to go out living in the Bronx. And if we wasn't around our family or our cousins, we had to move in a group. And even if we moved in a group, that's when we felt so safe. And I want to really jump to Dr. Powell here and talk about this generational trauma. It has affected us in so many ways. Could you talk about that?
Thank you for the question. One of the things I know for sure is that trauma that's not resolved in one generation gets transmitted to the next. And there is a lot of emerging evidence to affirm that at the cellular level, we're transmitting the traumas that we've experienced. At the epigenetic level, we're transmitting the traumas we've experienced. So if we don't do the healing now, our children and their children's children will have to do it for us. I do want to shift a bit because, part of the challenge for me always is, someone who works at the individual level and also at the systems level is how do we hold systems responsible? Because we're having a conversation this morning that is about how Black folk, heal, how we look over structural disadvantage in a single bound. And we're not superheroes. And we also know that environments constrain behavioral choice. So while we're talking about behavior change, about meditating more and eating better, I'm struck at the similarities between those recommendations and the faulty ones made by our former Surgeon General, who said to Black folk in the midst of the pandemic, if you just eat less fried chicken and do what Big Mama says, you'll be better. I mean that kind of evidence, sort of advice, reeks of victim blaming to me. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about how we have enforce systems change that can create therapeutic landscapes where Black folk can heal, grow, and thrive. So that when I do my yoga, I'm inoculated, long term from the stress and exposure, because the exposures stop. But as long as the exposures continue, then any behavior change efforts we make will be thwarted. So I just want to lift that up. That I'm in a space now where I want folks to put their money where their racial justice statements say they are. I want to see policies change. I want to see us not only consider, strategies like defunding the police, which have challenges in themselves, but I want us to think about how do we subject the systems to a forensic examination to ask the question that our dear sister Kamara Jones asked us to ask: how is racism operating here? And be asking that along the way, and then doing the work, the real village work that we're talking about, to change the intergenerational tie. That is what is necessary. And while we're talking about protected, spaces. I am not the person who's going to be talking about a safe space. I think they're great. I need a brave space. I need a brave space where folks can have their voices amplified and their full humanity recognized. Right. I also need for us to, in the Black community, to equally lift up everyone who has been injured. So I want to lift up the names of Breonna Taylor and Sandy Bland and Corian Gaines, because as we are parenting our children, we have to remember that boys and girls both need supports now. I'm concerned about when our children go back to school, having been in a situation of prolonged physical distancing and going back into school systems that are fractured, where school to prison pipelines are rampant and alive. How are we going to receive those children when they show up in those spaces exhibiting trauma symptomatology that gets, defined as a behavioral challenge, as a child not being able to sit still and pay attention? Are we going to be ready to receive them? That work has to happen for any of the work we're talking about here to have a sustained, healthful impact on the Black community that's now and intergenerationally.
Dr. Hammond, Dr. Powell just mentioned something about, and it got me just thinking about our children and how our parents, how do we address the feelings we have about trauma and white guilt that people are like either apologetic or saying get over it? It's like we have so many fronts that we have to deal with our own personal trauma that we've talked about, and then yet someone saying just get over it. How do we address that in our mental health?
Sorry, there I go, I'm mute again. When it comes to children, specifically to your question, the thing that I've seen, there needs to be a huge curriculum change, if you will. Obviously, the education system is rampant with racism. But particularly with preschool, let's say, I feel like a lot of the curriculum base, which is a start, is about empathy, it's about kindness and social emotional learning and those types of factors. But the problem is what we haven't addressed is race and racism. There's an extra component to that that's completely missing. Right now forever how long, what children are being taught, obviously it affects their adulthood. Whether it's the books they're reading that have all white characters, whether it's the movies they're seeing, the toys they're playing with, everything, when you have nothing that represents you or one or two things. And we know the disparities with kids in schools that get in trouble and are the quote unquote bad kids, which are Black kids, for the same exact, infraction that has happened. And kids at an early age, they start to internalize these things, especially the Black kids. But none of these conversations are being addressed in school. So I think the challenge, of course, is working in an education system. That's one of the questions I think I've gotten the most this past 2 weeks. I do a lot of work with the media, and I really strongly think this has to start in preschool. Again, yes, the programs that we have in high school are very important, but we really have to be starting at the preschool age. This whole idea, which is so flawed, that early kids are colorblind, which I hate that term, is the most ridiculous thing ever. They know that they have different color skin. They know that they are treated different. We have the doll test, which many of you are probably very familiar with. It's very clear. The data is very clear on that. But the issue that we have really is the education system that needs massive changes starting in the preschool ages.
Dr. Linda, right now you're the only white person on this panel. And I know you can't speak for the white community as a whole, but you mentioned something that resonated with me when you said white privilege, and you understand it. Do you think the white community needs to come together collectively to understand their privilege, so then maybe the Black community would then be able to trust that we are moving in the right direction?
I think this is going to happen organically. We have people pushing, people as activists, people protesting, voting. It's on all systems that I see the possibility of change now. No one can speak for the entire community, and I don't think all white people are ready, but there are a number of millennials and Y generation who are in the streets, in my neighborhood, in everybody's neighborhood, calling for change now. And that's the most exciting thing I've heard in a long time.
Thank you. And So one of the things that we have to also face is that I'm going to go right to Kelly because he works with so many youth. And I know me working with youth, I remember teaching a young boy who was 11, and I was like, you got to think about this and take the journey in longevity. He said, sir, I may never make it to the age of 25. How do we keep addressing that with our young boys emotionally and mentally in the spaces that we can do? How do you do it?
First and foremost, I always go back to where all this began. And so we take this back prior to the transatlantic slave trade and really educate them on many of the things that our people have excelled at that they may have not been exposed to because it's not in the curriculum in the school system, right? And so when you begin to break down a lot of the strengths that are inherent in them and that trickle down based on their DNA, the same way we're talking about DNA being impacted by trauma, there are so many good indicators that's also being passed down through DNA as well. And when you can convene that to them, and I'm a person, I will always be honest, transparent, and explain my story. I was just like them. I didn't think I would see 18. I had 3 master's degrees, almost finished my PhD, excelled in the military. So in the spirit of Ubuntu, I am them, and they are me. And when you explain that to them and you build trust, then they build a self-esteem and self-confidence that they can excel. And the numbers speak for themselves, whether it's kids who I work with in training schools, kids I worked with when I was doing therapy, it all aligns. And once you allow young people to continue to do the things that we as a society take away from them, which is conditioning them to move away from their curiosity and their scientific inquiry of life and reinforce that through the integrated arts and that holistic concept of mind, body, and soul. But to Dr. Powell's point earlier, I think it's important to also tell them that we need them to operate within their strengths. And everybody has a strength. And understanding and recognizing that, and that their diversity doesn't make them weak. My strength might be math. His strength may be science. Hers may be English. We need all those, not collective talents, but we need it to be synergized so that we come to the table to be able to not just have one skill set, but we bring all those skill sets to help them move forward. And I've really realized that has positioned those young people to really start to depend on one another and understand that they all bring something special to the table.
Dr. Kelsey, you mentioned that being from your native home, is it understanding your history has helped you deal with your trauma and most blacks who don't recognize their history or accept their history, does that hurt their trauma?
I'm so sorry. There was an airplane going past and I couldn't even hear your question. Could you repeat it?
Yes.
This DC life at its finest right here.
You had mentioned how, you know, your heritage, that you understood your history and where you came from. And there's a lot of blacks that don't recognize their history or accept their history. How's that? How do you explain that trauma? Has it helped or hurt the education about dealing with it?
Yeah, so growing up in Bermuda, there's really very little education in the schools about racism, Black people, because as I said, we're the majority. It's kind of, there's kind of just a different approach, I think, to education. And in the U.S., I have a professor and her partner was a teacher, and he was actually trying to incorporate Black education into the schools, and he was fired for that. So I do think there's, there's a need to have Black education in schools. And even in Bermuda, where Black people are the majority, I think when you don't know your history, you don't recognize traumas that are happening to you. When I first came to the U.S. in college, looking back, there were so many microaggressions that I dealt with that I didn't even recognize. People had to tell me, "Oh, Kelsey, that was race. Somebody was acting in a racially aggressive manner to you," because I didn't recognize it. I wasn't privy to racism, as much as I am now. It wasn't on my radar. So absolutely educating ourselves about what microaggressions look like. Speaking out also against individuals when you feel like you are under attack, whether it's subtly or overtly. That's really important. I think developing language also to speak out has been something I've always struggled with, and I think a lot of Black people struggle with as well. Like, what do I say when somebody insults me or I'm the victim of a microaggression? Like, how do I intervene here? What do I say? Because I think a lot of times we view these things in retrospect. We say in hindsight, "Oh man, I should have said this. I should have intervened. I should have educated this person at the time when it was happening." And it can be difficult to do that. But I do think it does start in schools, as has already been mentioned on this panel, educating our young people about our history. And this is something I'm looking to take back to Bermuda as well, when I hopefully move back there with my partner to launch this telehealth company. Just really integrating this idea of Black history in an effort to encourage Black excellence. I think one of the panelists mentioned just encouraging self-sufficiency in our young people is really important. I think that's kind of where this movement is going to begin with racial equality, is encouraging our Black people to recognize that we all have a role to play, whether you're a musician or you're an artist or a dancer, you're a mental health professional, you have a role to play in bringing about this sense of racial equality. This is really a human rights issue. It's not just for Black people to fix. It's not just for white people to fix. We all have a role to play, and we just need to recognize, what is my role? How can I help myself to be self-sufficient, looking inward and finding the language to describe how we're feeling in any given moment. All of those things kind of come together, I think, is going to help us kind of advance and bring about this equality that we're all looking for.
I know we're not going to go too much longer, and I want to give everyone one shot so we can talk about anger. Just make it about 2 minutes. And so I know people got other things to do this afternoon, and before we all let go and have to sign off and do whatever, I just want to say it's been a God-given blessing to have people on about conversating about our mental health, because I know how important it is to me, myself personally, so I can be a strong person, a strong Black man, a strong husband, a strong brother, a strong friend, and a community activist that we can build together, not just in the Black community, but globally. So I wanted us to talk about anger real quick. Dr. Jasmine, you're up first, please. We're going to give each other about 2 minutes to have a conversation about anger and how we can address it as a community or individually.
So again, thinking about the systems, because I think that was really where I would love to be positioned to talk about how we get righteously angry at systems and interrogate the responses of systems in terms of how we are dealing with microaggressions. When we're talking about the spaces that we're in every single day, not just thinking about the person who treats you bad, but perhaps, income equity. We're talking about, funding for nonprofits. I just put in there for Black-led nonprofits to help Black communities. Who's holding the purse of those who actually are needing to get those resources in the communities to overcome and achieve and things? Because again, there are different domains of health, and so we have to consider that as we try to advance, and how they're all really interconnected and impacting our lives. So I don't think in terms of dealing with anger, it's a negative connotation to anger. I think that is justified in ways that we just have to be willing to position ourselves in the right places to address those who are really creating the situations that we're in, rather than thinking about it from a position of, what's happening right now, because we're seeing it in a lot of places. And this violence that's happening to our community is happening on all fronts.
And Dr. Vance, please.
Well, I think, anger is a typical response to this chronic stress that we are always having. It's nothing new. I think it just comes out in a wide variety of way of a response to frustration and also grief and loss. The loss of opportunities and grieving the opportunities that we wish we could have had due to a system that was intentionally created in this specific way. A lot of times we like to say the system is broke, but it was created to operate in this type of format. And I think people have the right to be angry. I think it's okay to be angry. I think a lot of times we try to shift the narrative that we shouldn't be angry, which again is a way of policing our emotions. And I think we have to be very careful when we talk about anger, that we're not angry just because we feel like it. We're angry because something is impacting our rights, our freedoms, and our personal well-being.
And Mr. Alexander? Mute. We all do it because we don't want background noises.
All right, I'm back. I said that that anger is justified. That in love and community, that rage is necessary. But the other component to that is self-care, and so that we need to make sure that we remain spiritually grounded. That can include prayer. We spoke of meditation, mindfulness, whatever works to help restore what is well with you. And then the other thing is that we should sometimes take breaks from social media. Although we're on Zoom, sometimes, too much exposure isn't healthy for us. So we need to know when we need to take breaks and let others replenish us. And so ask for help. And so I think all those things need to be integrated so that no matter what level you're talking about, if you're talking about the individual level or if we're talking the family or neighborhood level, that we can support one another and not self-destruct, not implode. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you. And Mr. Kelly, please. Mr. Little?
I'm going to do something really different. So instead of responding to that, I'm just going to tell y'all a quick poem. If we build as we climb, then what are we building this time? Our mind can't be confined to a physical place or time. I understand that our assignment is divine. Before I grind, align, educate, ignite, and transform, understanding that new dreams should be born. Disenfranchised, exploited, and extorted. Reconditioned to economically empowered, working together and supported. Eradicating, once again, is important. In order for us to eradicate, we all must link up and intertwine so that we can change this thing that we talk about, anger, because anger is a reaction, but it doesn't always have to be a bad reaction. It's how we use it as fuel to position us to make the necessary changes. I think necessity is the mother of all innovation.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Powell, I'm going to come down to you.
So thank you for the question. So I want to say this, that about anger, and I've written a lot about this precisely because I think that anger's gotten a bad rap. And also I think we revisionist historians will have us believe that anger has no place in social movements, when in fact, if we revisit history with a clear eye, with a third eye, then we see that actually anger was at the root of every civil rights movement in this nation. Every significant civil rights gain that we have achieved has come about because people got angry. Dr. King got angry before he went to the mountaintop, and we like to only remember the parts of him that aren't seen peaceful. But if you read, as I've said to people, the letter from a Birmingham jail, then you hear the anger. The anger is there. It's how he catalyzed it that makes a difference. And if any group of people are equipped to catalyze anger, it's Black folk and brown folk. Because despite what's happened to us, we are still civically engaged. We vote every day. We take our children to school. We participate in our communities. So we know how to catalyze anger into productive action. So that narrative has to shift about, Black folk just getting angry, because we know how to, and we've demonstrated that we have that capacity. But what I would like even more than that, than having Black folk figure out how to catalyze their anger, which we're doing, is to have other folk, white folk, be comfortable sitting in that anger, holding space, as I've said, as president of the American Psychological Association's Division on Men and Masculinities. We have launched an initiative around holding space for boys and men of color because we want folks to be able to sit in that anger and that frustration and absorb and experience it so that we can build the empathy muscle that's necessary for us to move the needle. We have to, while we're fighting those necessary fights and we're catalyzing anger, we have to remember to pour love back into our children who, again, are bearing witness to these things so they can learn how to catalyze anger. But more importantly, we have to have folks get comfortable with being uncomfortable. In Jewish families, there's a tradition of sitting shiva.
Yes.
During the period of mourning.
Yeah.
How about we all sit shiva for a minute and allow Black folk to exercise out of their systems, bodies, and minds centuries, generations of pain, frustration, and trauma.
Oh man, you hit it right on the head, and I know with the practices I do sit in Shiva, but it's a different type of meditation, but I so agree with you. Dr. Hammond, please.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with what, has all been stated thus far. As far as anger, definitely there's a right to be angry, understandably. So for those of you who may have seen it, Trevor Noah, he had a video that went viral about how this idea of protests, because there was this idea at the beginning of the protest a couple weeks ago of how you're supposed to protest, and you're not supposed to be angry, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do it that way. And it's the same thing when it comes to anger. It's actually really good. I would highly recommend it. It's about 18 minutes long, but highly recommend it. And it's about social contracts, and it's the same thing when it comes to anger, particularly with Black people. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. But the reality is, as far as mental health and as far as healing, especially racial trauma, you absolutely have to process anger and not sweep it under the rug, because we know when you start sweeping emotions under the rug, they come back to haunt you in some way. It will come back. And as we talked about earlier with the body and trauma and anger, suppressing all of that, it will come back. So I'm elated right now that we're, I think, finally starting to get into that dialogue and acceptance a bit, that people are allowed to be angry and not be superhuman and just sweep everything under the rug, and just really, again, continuing these dialogues.
And Dr. Linda, please, you're next.
I would say that anger is a normal response to a racist world. Having said that, it needs to be directed into action, which is what we're talking about today. And I think on the personal level, it needs to be understood, certainly expressed, healed, the grief and loss. On the community level, we need a lot of activism, which I'm hearing about today, and I hear a whole lot more of the last month or so. Expression so that individuals can feel their power. We each are so powerful, and we have, as has been said today, unique talents that the aggregate needs. A country that doesn't respect the talents of its people is a very weak country indeed. And we can do much, much better than that.
Thank you so much, and I agree. Dr. Kelsey, you're next, please.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the fact that, Black people have a bad rap when it comes to being angry, even if we're fully justified. And I'm actually writing an article right now, and I'm writing about, back in the 60s, a lot of white psychiatrists coined this term protest psychosis. And it reminds me about what's going on right now. And protest psychosis, just that term is so pathologizing, right? So it's basically saying that, anger and the outrage that Black people are experiencing is a syndrome, and it needs to be cured or fixed instead of just felt, right? So again, pathologizing Black people, Black responses to an outrageous situation. So I do think that people of color have the full right to feel angry, outraged right now. And again, as was stated, that anger also needs to be directed into action. And it's been interesting going down to the Black Lives Matter Plaza downtown and seeing how Black people are doing that. I think that's a really great space and a nice forum for people of color, and even people who are not of color, to go out there and express themselves, have the freedom to do so. I think all that's really important. But again, just re-emphasizing that it is okay to be angry. If you need a space to process your anger, please reach out for help. Don't suffer in silence, because things that we don't talk out, we end up acting it out. So just processing your anger in a healthy way, I think, is really important.
And Dr. D, last but not least, please.
So yesterday, I was inspired to go to the Black Lives Matters Plaza, downtown DC. And if you're in the area, please go. It was so inspiring, amazing, and all of those things. But I saw a sign there, and I had to take a picture of the sign, and it says, "Silence is violence." And typically, I've been hearing that floating around for the last 2 weeks. It typically is addressed to white people, saying that if you stay silent, you're going to do violence basically to the community, to social progress. But I took that sign to mean silence is violence to the person who is being silent.
Yes.
It's violent to ourselves. It's causing so much internal turmoil. I just feel like anger, like everyone has already stated, is not new for us. Some people just got angry a couple weeks ago. I think that most of us on here have been angry for a long time, but it's time for us to stop suppressing those emotions and let them go ahead and bubble up to the top. Because if we don't allow them to be expressed and released, then we are going to experience the depression and all those other psychological issues that we want to prevent. So let's go ahead and let it bubble up to the top, because silence is violence to ourselves.
I looked at anger as like a relationship. I think this is a relationship. If you look at it as a marital relationship, a friend relationship, but if we definitely look at it as a partner relationship, that I never understood my partner. My partner, I felt, never understood me and what I've gone through or what I've been through or who I am. So how can this relationship ever be strong enough for us to proceed down this long path of unity? And I think as a community, we've never been understood. We never understood the other part. We've never felt like we've been understood. We've never felt like they ever looked at us as human beings, as civilized people, as smart people. We always seem to want to assimilate and to associate, and they still denied us, and yet we're angry. So for us not to be angry, we have to be convinced that our partners, whoever those partners are, understands what we are feeling, what we are going through, and allow us in that open space to express ourselves. I want to say thank you so much to my panel and to everyone who is watching and will share and talk about this. This is not the last of our conversation. If anyone wants to say anything before we sign off, please just do raise your hand. Otherwise, I am so overwhelmed. Happy. My wife is extremely ecstatic. She's watching and she just loves it. So please, anyone has anything last to say before we sign off? Go ahead, Miss Jasmine, Dr. Jasmine.
Yes, I wanted to just mention that Black Ladies in Public Health is putting together a memorial for Black people who have died of COVID-19 in the United States. We have organized over 1,000 names and faces and stories of people who have died. We are representing a large percentage of the population. And again, we're talking about lives lost, cultural respect for those individuals, and a lot of the rituals that we had were no longer in place, with the exception of George Floyd, as we saw. So really and truly, we have to think about not just losing lives, in one instance and not others. We are constantly being inundated with loss, and so the website is unitedmemories.com. Again, it's unitedmemories.com, and we want to get support because we're doing this all volunteer-based. But this is certainly something that we're wanting to do for ourselves.
Anyone next? Again, thank you. So I'm going to sign off with prayer. Please, thank you, Heavenly Father, for bringing us together, and let our words resonate throughout this global universe, and let us come together as a community, as a Black community, but not just a Black community, but as a human force, a one single cell organism that can only thrive, and through your greatness and through your treasure. In Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. Thank you so much, everyone. You guys have a blessed Saturday, and I will talk to everyone individually. If you have any questions, you guys always hit me up, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.
You all too.